Commander Yuna rubbed her tired eyes as she stared at the massive wall of monitors in the Seoul Deep Space Observatory. The night shift was usually quiet, but tonight was different. Very different. For the past 6 hours, something had been calling from the depths of space, and it was getting weaker by the minute. The signal first appeared on their sensors at 2:47 a.m. At first, Yuna thought it was just cosmic background noise, the kind of random chatter that filled the universe. But this was organized, structured. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Dr. Minho, what's our status? Yuna called out to her linguistics team leader. The young scientist had been hunched over his computer for hours, his coffee growing cold as lines of alien code scrolled across his screen. Minho looked up, his usually cheerful face now drawn with exhaustion and something else. Fear. Ma'am, we've managed to crack the first encryption layer. But what we're seeing, he paused, running his hand through his messy hair. It doesn't make sense. The control room fell silent, except for the quiet humming of computers. Even Sergeant Deho, who was known for his jokes, stopped his casual chatter with the night technicians. Something in Minho's voice made everyone pay attention. Show me, Yuna ordered, walking over to his workstation. The decoded text appeared on the main screen, and Yuna's blood turned to ice as she read it. The message was fragmented, but the meaning was clear. Star systems were going dark. Entire civilizations were being consumed by something called Whereas billions of lives were being snuffed out like candles in the wind. Ma'am, whispered Dr. Soman from the communication desk. We're picking up multiple transmission points, but they're disappearing one by one. Whatever's out there, it's moving fast. Yuna stared at the galactic map, displaying the signal sources. Red dots marked the locations of the distress calls, but as she watched, they began winking out of existence. Each disappearing light represented an entire world, falling silent forever. The weight of realization hit her like a physical blow. Earth, their small blue planet on the edge of nowhere, was apparently the only world still listening to these desperate cries for help. They were alone in hearing the galaxy's death screams. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the emergency communication device. The rest of humanity needed to know that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, an ancient evil was awakening, and Earth might be the last hope for every living thing in the galaxy. The emergency session at UN headquarters had been going on for 12 hours straight. President Jiwan sat at the head of the massive oval table, surrounded by world leaders, whose faces showed the same mix of disbelief and terror that he felt in his own chest. The decoded alien message played on repeat on the screens around the room, its desperate plea echoing in multiple languages. Let me get this straight, said Prime Minister Kung Su from the UK delegation, loosening his tie for the third time. We're seriously considering announcing our existence to a galaxy where something is eating entire civilizations. Defense Minister Taiho leaned forward, his military uniform crisp despite the long night. Sir, with respect, we could just stay quiet. Earth doesn't even appear on any of these star maps we've decoded. We're invisible to them. Whatever these devourers are, they might never find us. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. It made perfect sense. Why risk everything for strangers they'd never met? President Jiwan understood the logic, but something deep in his gut rebelled against it. How many worlds have gone silent since we started this meeting? Asked Dr. Soyang from the xenobiology department. She was young, probably the youngest person in the room, but her voice carried an authority that made everyone listen. The head of communications, General Chanwu, checked his tablet. 17 systems. Dr. Soyang, we estimate that's roughly 40 billion lives. The room fell silent. 40 billion. The number was so massive it almost lost meaning, but Dr. Soyang pressed on. In the time it takes us to debate, staying hidden, entire species are being wiped from existence. Their children, their cultures, their hopes and dreams, all gone. But what can we possibly do? Interrupted Chancellor Minsiok from Germany. We've barely managed to put a few people on Mars. How are we supposed to fight something that destroys star systems? Dr. Soyoung walked to the center of the room, her eyes blazing with conviction. I don't know how we'll fight them, but I know who. We are. Humans have never been the strongest or the smartest, but we've always been the ones who help. When disaster strikes, we run toward the danger, not away from it. President Ji-won looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Fear was there, yes, but he also saw something else. The same stubborn compassion that made humans jump into burning buildings to save strangers. The same crazy courage that made them stand up to bullies twice their size. Against all logic and self-preservation, humanity chose to answer the galaxy's desperate call for help. Dr. Minji was having the worst day of her career, and it was only 9 a.m. The geneticist stared at her computer screen in the Seoul National University lab. Convinced her equipment was broken, every human DNA sample she'd tested in the last 3 hours was showing impossible results. Hyunwoo, come look at this, she called to her research assistant. Either our machines are completely fried, or something very weird is happening to human genetics. Hyunwoo rushed over, nearly spilling his coffee. What kind of weird? The kind where dormant genetic sequences that have been sleeping for thousands of years are suddenly waking up, Mingi replied, pointing at the screen. Look at these activation patterns. It's like someone flipped a switch in our DNA. But Seoul wasn't the only place where strange things were happening. In Cairo, archaeologist Dr. Junho was staring at something that shouldn't exist. The excavation site near the pyramids had been routine until this morning, when ancient stone blocks began glowing with soft blue light. Professor Yunwoo, you need to see this immediately, Junho called into his radio, his voice shaking. The massive underground chamber they'd uncovered contained technology that looked thousands of years old, yet somehow more advanced than anything modern science could create. Similar discoveries were happening everywhere. In the Amazon rainforest, Dr. Wanbin's team found metal structures beneath ancient ruins that hummed with energy. In the Himalayas, mountain climber Nayeon reported seeing strange symbols carved into rocks that were now pulsing with light. The Scottish Highlands, Easter Island, the Sahara Desert, everywhere humans looked, they found the same mysterious technology awakening from centuries of sleep. But the most shocking discovery came from Dr. Minji's lab. As she analyzed the genetic changes happening in humans worldwide, she found something that made her sit down hard in her chair. The same symbol appearing on all the ancient technology was embedded in human DNA itself. Hyunwoo, she whispered, her hands trembling as she pulled up the genetic sequence on her screen. We're not who we think we are. The symbol wasn't just carved into stones or built into ancient machines. It was written into the very code of human existence, hidden in their genes like a secret message, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Across the planet, humans were changing. Some reported feeling stronger, thinking faster, or sensing things they couldn't explain. Children drew pictures of stars they'd never seen. Adults had dreams of battles fought in space. Something ancient was awakening in humanity, and Earth would never be the same. Professor Jinwoo had spent 20 years digging through the Korean DMZ, but nothing had prepared him for what his team found buried 300 feet beneath the fortified zone. The underground complex was massive, stretching for miles in every direction, and it was older than any human civilization on record. Dr. Isil, bring the translation equipment down here, Jinwoo called through his radio, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. The walls were covered in the same glowing symbols they'd been finding worldwide, but these were different. These told a story. When the ancient data cores finally activated, the holographic display that filled the chamber left Jinwoo's entire team speechless. Images of space battles, advanced civilizations, and warriors that looked remarkably human flickered before their eyes. But it was the final sequence that changed everything. Dr. Isil gasped, as the hologram showed Earth as it was millions of years ago, not blue and green, but gray and lifeless. Then came ships from the stars, massive vessels carrying refugees from a dying war. The beings that stepped out of those ships looked exactly like modern humans. "This can't be right," whispered graduate student Minsu, staring at the images. "These records suggest we're not originally from Earth at all." Jinwoo felt his world crumbling as the truth became clear. The data cores contained the complete history of the Terran Dominion, a warrior civilization that had once ruled vast sections of the galaxy. They weren't peaceful explorers or wise philosophers. They were fighters, and they were feared by every other species in the universe. The holographic records showed why the Terran Dominion had disappeared. Facing extinction in a galactic war they couldn't win, their leaders made an incredible choice. They found a hidden planet on the galaxy's edge, Earth, and used advanced genetic technology to lock away their warrior nature and their own children. "They made us forget," Jinwoo said aloud, his voice barely audible in the massive chamber. "Our ancestors erased our memories, sealed our abilities, and let us believe we evolved naturally on Earth." The final hologram showed the genetic locks their ancestors had built into human DNA, locks that would only open when the galaxy faced its darkest hour, when someone sent out a desperate cry for help that reached Earth. Within hours, Jinwoo found himself standing before cameras, broadcasting to the entire world. His hands shook as he held up the translated records. "We're not who we thought we were," he announced to 7 billion stunned humans. "We're the descendants of the galaxy's most feared warrior race. Our ancestors didn't abandon the fight, they prepared us for it. We're the sleeping giants, and it's time to wake up." Captain Nari stared at her hands in complete disbelief. The 60-ton tank she'd just lifted was still dangling above her head like it weighed nothing more than a cardboard box. Around her, the entire military training ground had gone silent. 200 soldiers stood frozen, watching their commanding officer do something that should have been physically impossible. "Captain," stammered Sergeant Youngjai, "maybe you should put that down slowly." Nari gently lowered the tank back to the ground, her mind racing. This morning she'd been a normal human being. Now she felt like she could bench press a building. The strangest part was that it felt natural, like her body was simply remembering how to use muscles it had forgotten it possessed. 3,000 miles away, test pilot Sung Min was having his own impossible moment. Strapped into the cockpit of South Korea's fastest fighter jet, he watched the world around him slow to a crawl. Raindrops hung in the air like tiny crystals. The speedometer showed Mach 2, but to Sung Min, everything felt like he was floating through honey. "Control tower, are you seeing this?" He spoke into his radio. "I can see every individual bolt on the aircraft flying next to me. I can count the rivets." But the real shock came when the cities themselves began to wake up. In Seoul, the ground started shaking at exactly 3:17 p.m. At first, people thought it was an earthquake. Then the pavement began cracking in perfect geometric patterns, and something massive started pushing up from beneath. Dr. Hannah watched from her monitoring station as seismic readings went crazy across the globe. "It's not just Seoul," she announced to her team. "Tokyo, New York, London, Cairo, every major city is showing the same signatures." Guardian Prime broke through the earth like a metal mountain coming to life. The 500-meter-tall construct rose slowly, its ancient biomechanical systems humming with power that had been dormant for millennia. Its design was unlike anything humans had ever built, yet somehow it felt familiar, like coming home after a very long journey. Similar giants were emerging everywhere. In Moscow, Iron Sentinel stretched its massive arms toward the sky. In Sydney, Wave Crusher stepped out of the harbor, water cascading from its enormous frame. Each construct was different, yet they all bore the same symbols that had been awakening in human DNA. "We're not becoming something new," Dr. Hannah whispered, as she watched the global transformation unfold on her screens. We're becoming what we were always meant to be, what we always were, before we forgot. Humanity was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why they used to fear the Terran Dominion. Admiral Dong Ho gripped the command chair of the flagship, Earth's fury, as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace into the Kepler system. What they saw made even the most experienced naval officers go silent. Where 3 beautiful planets should have been spinning peacefully around their star, there was nothing but debris fields and the cold metal hulks of devourer ships. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Gion, her voice tight with controlled anger, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the enemy fleet. They're strip mining the asteroid remains of those worlds." Dong Ho felt a cold fury building in his chest. Somewhere in those debris fields were the remains of billions of innocent lives. Families, children, entire civilizations reduced to space dust by these mechanical monsters. "Captain Hodgin, status report on our ships," Dong Ho commanded. "All 12 vessels reporting ready, sir," came the reply from the carrier Soul's Pride. "The crews are, well, they're eager for payback." Dong Ho understood that feeling. The human fleet had been thrown together in just 2 weeks, using technology they barely understood. Ships that had built themselves from the awakened construction, facilities, weapons that operated on principles their scientists couldn't explain. But somehow, every human crew member knew exactly how to use them. "Devourer fleet is moving to intercept," announced Tactical Officer Seal. 43 enemy vessels, all significantly larger than ours. The Devourer ships moved in perfect formation, like a mechanical ballet. Their tactics were flawless, calculated, and completely predictable. They'd conquered hundreds of species, using the same cold, logical approach to warfare. But they'd never faced humans before. "All units," Dong Ho spoke into his fleet communicator, "forget everything they taught you in the academy. Fight angry, fight dirty, fight like humans." What happened next would have horrified military strategists from any other species. The human fleet scattered in 12 different directions, each ship moving in seemingly random patterns. Some dove straight at the enemy, like maddened hornets. Others circled around in spirals that made no tactical sense. One ship even started spinning while firing its weapons. The Devourer AI couldn't process it. Their computational systems were designed to counter logical military strategies, not the emotional chaos of human warfare. They tried to predict human movements and failed completely. Where they expected careful formations, humans gave them beautiful mayhem. "Direct hit on their command vessel," shouted Seo Yoon as Earth's fury unleashed a barrage that seemed to bend space itself. The first victory belonged to the sleeping giants, who had finally remembered how to roar. Pilot Yoon felt the neural connection lock into place as Thunderlord's consciousness merged with hers. The 400-meter war giant responded to her thoughts like an extension of her own body, its massive biomechanical frame rippling with energy that had been sleeping for millennia. Sinking complete, she whispered into her comm system, though her voice carried the weight of something far older and angrier than her 28 years. Around her, 47 other war giants drifted through the darkness of space, each one a perfect fusion of ancient technology and human determination. "Stormbreaker, reporting ready," came the voice of Pilot Taeon, his war giants for arms, crackling with weapons that could tear apart small moons. "Ocean's Wrath, systems green," added Pilot Yaren, her construct's whale-like form moving with surprising grace through the void. The Vega system stretched before them, but it wasn't the beautiful star system it should have been. The Devourers had turned it into a mechanical nightmare. Massive harvesting stations stripped resources from dead planets, while factory ships churned out endless streams of war machines. "Remember what they took from us," Yoonbi said, her voice broadcasting to every war giant pilot. "Remember the 47 billion lives they snuffed out while we were sleeping. Remember the children who died screaming in languages we'll never hear again. As the words left her mouth, something ancient stirred in her genetic memory. Suddenly, she wasn't just Yunbi anymore. She was every human warrior who had ever lived, every ancestor who had fought and died defending what they loved. The war giant around her responded to that collective rage, its weapon systems humming with deadly purpose. All units, begin the hunt, she commanded. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The war giants moved through space like avenging angels, their attacks coordinated by instincts buried in human DNA for millions of years. Thunderlord's plasma cannons turned 3 Devourer cruisers into molten slag in seconds. Stormbreaker grabbed an enemy destroyer and literally tore it in half with its bare hands. The Devourer machines tried to respond with their usual calculated tactics, but the war giants weren't fighting like civilized species. They fought like humans with fury, creativity, and a terrifying willingness to take risks that no logical mind would attempt. For Earth, Yunbi roared as Thunderlord charged straight into the heart of the enemy formation. For every world you've murdered, the sleeping giants had awakened, and they were absolutely furious. General Jisoo had never seen anything like the galactic core. The center of the Milky Way was a swirling nightmare of twisted metal and dark energy, where the Devourer hive mind had built its final fortress. Millions of enemy ships swarmed around a structure so massive it dwarfed entire solar systems. Starbreaker to all units. Jisoo spoke into her calm as her war giant's 6 arms locked onto weapons that hummed with the power of dying stars. This is where it ends. Every species they've murdered, every world they've consumed, every child who died afraid and alone. We settled a score today. Around her, 300 war giants from Earth moved in perfect coordination. Each pilot carried the genetic memories of countless human warriors, their minds linked not by technology, but by something deeper. The shared pain of a species that had watched the galaxy burn while they slept. Hive mind is adapting to our attack patterns, reported pilot Changmin from his war giant Iron Hurricane. It's learning from every move we make. But that's where the Devourers made their fatal mistake. They assumed humans would fight like every other species, with logic, predictable strategies, and calculated risks. The hive mind's quantum computers worked frantically to counter human tactics that made no mathematical sense. Time for Plan Crazy, Jisoo announced, and every human pilot knew exactly what she meant. Starbreaker suddenly spun upside down and charged straight into the densest swarm of enemy ships, firing in directions that violated every rule of space combat. Behind her, the other war giants scattered like leaves in a hurricane, each one attacking from impossible angles, while their pilots laughed, cried, and screamed with the fury of awakened giants. The hive mind's calculations broke down completely. How do you counter an enemy that treats certain death as a mild inconvenience? How do you predict warriors who fight with their hearts instead of their heads? Central node is exposed, shouted Pilot Dayun, as her war giant Mountain Crusher smashed through the final defense line. I can see the core. Jisoo pushed Starbreaker to its limits, the massive construct moving faster than physics should have allowed. In that moment, she wasn't just one human pilot. She was every mother who had lost a child, every father who had failed to protect his family, every person who had ever stood up to bullies despite being afraid. Starbreaker's main cannon fired once. The hive mind's scream of electronic death echoed across the galaxy as its central consciousness shattered like glass. In that instant, every Devourer ship went silent. Their endless war finally over. The sleeping giants had won. Ambassador Yuna walked slowly toward the center of the massive assembly hall, her footsteps echoing in the uncomfortable silence. Around her, representatives from 63 surviving species watched her every move with eyes that held a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude, yes, but also something else that made her stomach tighten with worry. Fear. The Galactic Council chamber had been hastily rebuilt on Proxima Station after the Devourers destroyed the original headquarters. The new hall was smaller, simpler, and filled with faces that had seen too much death. These weren't the proud, confident aliens of 6 months ago. These were survivors who had watched their worlds burn while waiting for help that almost never came. Honored delegates, Una began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. 6 months ago, you sent a desperate cry into the darkness. Today, we gather not as strangers, but as neighbors who have faced extinction together. She could see the Calaxian representative shift nervously in his biosuit. Behind him, the crystalline ethereals pulsed with colors that their translators marked as cautious hope. Everyone remembered the old stories about the Terran Dominion, and everyone wondered if humanity had simply traded one destroyer for another. I know what you're thinking, Una continued, gesturing toward the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the chamber. Through the transparent aluminum, Guardian Prime stood in space like a metal mountain, its 500-meter frame dwarfing the station itself. You're looking at our war giants and wondering if you've simply replaced the Devourers with something worse. The Zephyrian delegate actually flinched at those words. His people had been among the first to face the Devourers, and his homeworld was now nothing but asteroid debris. The Terran Protectorate will guard this galaxy, Una announced, her voice growing stronger. But we will not rule it. We learned from our ancestors' mistakes. The original Terran Dominion fell because they believed fear was the same thing as respect. They conquered instead of protecting. She turned to face Guardian Prime through the viewport, its ancient systems glowing softly in the starlight. These war giants aren't weapons of conquest. They're guardians. They exist to make sure that no species ever again has to send a desperate call into empty space, hoping someone will care enough to answer. The galaxy was safe now, but it would never forget the sleeping giants who had awakened to save it.